This module will talk about legislation and enforcement within the industry. We have representatives from the AG office, the Immigration Department, from Inland Revenue, and local government. So the goal obviously is to establish a streamlined approval process for foreign direct investment that maximizes the involvement of Bahamian-based professionals across the board. For us right now, specifically we're talking about the building industry. And then obviously this talks about maximizing government revenue, knowledge transfer, and building a capacity for future projects. Obviously, if you don't participate in a project, you can't get that experience. So we want to try to talk through some of the ways we can improve these areas. Overview, this forum is created to improve the level of participation again, FDI process early on. So the aspects of these personnel are involved from their various departments. We want to talk through that. And start off with a few of the general questions. First off, sorry? Yeah, I know. First off, we want to have the panelists just introduce themselves and introduce the department they represent so that you guys can have an idea of who to direct questions to. I'm starting with Ms. Miller.
Good morning, my name is Shane Miller, Assistant Director of Legal Affairs at the Office of the Attorney General. As Minister was speaking this morning, yes, I am not an engineer, but our office deals with everything in government, and I've dealt with so many engineering contracts, I feel like an engineer.
Good morning, my name is Donnelly King Burrows, Superintendent at the Department of Immigration.
Good morning. My name is Joel Lewis. I'm the Acting Undersecretary, Ministry of Transport and Local Government, which comprises, I think the Minister touched on most of them this morning, the port, road traffic, post office, Met office, maritime. I think I covered just about all of them. I'm recently posted there. I've been in education for 30 years. I'm sitting in for the Director of Local Government who's currently in Trinidad.
Good morning. My name is Keith Worrell. I'm a tax consultant with the Department of Inland Revenue. We're basically here to provide any answers that you might require with regard to revenue collection, revenue generation, etc., all right, from any projects you might be involved with. I do have here with me, and that's why I feel very confident sitting up here this morning, because I came with backup. You know, whenever we talk about revenue, that always creates a problem. So in anticipation of that, and in keeping with our policy of answering every question you ask, bear in mind I don't know is an answer, I brought backup with me. I have here, and I want to introduce this person. She's an undersecretary, and she is now the acting chief valuation officer and director of and controller of Inland Revenue, Ms. Roll. She's here with us this morning. So I've got adequate backup. Any questions I can't answer, she will.
Well, you know what, Ms. Roll, why don't you join us? Come and take a seat at the podium. Okay, we're going to dive right in. So obviously some of the questions are listed here, but I'm going to go down the list. And feel free to just flash your card, just any paper on the desk, so we know that you have a question or comment, and we will interact openly as a conversation. So one of the first things I want to touch on from an immigration standpoint is you got someone that comes through the airport, or they're present in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and they're performing work without the relevant work permits. What do you see as a way for us to tackle unlicensed professionals, persons that are coming here to do work that they're not approved to do here in the Bahamas? What do you see as a way for us to tackle that?
Good morning. Okay, the way to tackle that is we need to get the information to immigration so that we would know of this occurrence, because persons coming into the Bahamas, they come a whole lot of times, if they come for business or as a consultant or so forth, they tend to disguise it so that we wouldn't know when they're entering the Bahamas. So we would depend on the public or the persons they come in to work with, you know, on the side, you didn't hire them, so you would say, well, I don't think this person has a permit or something like that. Or verify it, call the department and say, and we could investigate it from there.
Okay. One of the things we want to talk about as far as enforcement is also, one of the suggestions was looking at projects that are under construction and being able to tell either from a tax, sort of a tax audit or an NIB's position. You have a project that has a certain amount of laborers, certain amount of professionals that are, you know, you would estimate to be on this project, but the revenue is not being seen. Does Inland Revenue have any means of tackling something like that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The point raised is quite an interesting point. We, like any other agency, can only operate on information that is presented to us. And it's not only what I think we want everybody to understand is that it's not only the implications as far as, for example, immigration is concerned. It's a major source of revenue loss if we have persons conducting business in the Bahamas and we are not aware of it. We can't be everywhere. So we have to rely on you advising us in the same way in which you would advise the Immigration Department. We're trying to have a situation where we create an environment in which we are sharing information among agencies. But the Act says that anyone conducting business in the Bahamas, any person conducting business in the Bahamas, that's the Business License Act, must, not may, but must, all right, have a license. And a foreign person conducting business in the Bahamas must have a temporary license. They must apply for a temporary license. Now, the significant thing in that regard is that the license fees paid with regard to someone conducting business in the Bahamas on a temporary basis is based on the contract value. So it's important that we get as much information as possible. We aren't engineers. All right, and yes, we can look at our tax revenues, and we can basically say, well, you know, based on the activities that we know is taking place at X, Y place or Y or something like that, this is what we're collecting in terms of business license fees. But if you have rogue contractors operating and this information isn't passed on to us, there is nothing we can do. So what is happening is that they're robbing you of work, and they're robbing your country of revenue.
I mean, you can entertain questions. Feel free. Thank you. Yes. So in the issuance of what you call temporary business licenses, based on the types of those licenses being requested, let's say if it is someone who's an architect or an engineer who is making an application, are those licenses granted within the context that those persons would have to be in collaboration? Because when we make applications for our business licenses, we have to present all of our qualifications, all of our certification in order for us to get those licenses.
Mm-hmm.
Are these temporary licenses just issued the fact that you're finding that you're getting in the revenue, as opposed to the fact that these persons should, in essence, any person making an application for a license within the professional industry or protection where there's a regulatory body, they should make that the person representing that profession should actually be the one making that application and not the developer or an individual doing that by themselves. I think that's a way where persons could possibly be skirting around the professional industry. I don't know if it's done. Maybe you could respond as to how that format or how those temporary licenses are issued.
Okay, I can basically just speak to the way in which the Act works and the way in which we look at it. if you're applying for a business license and you have to also be licensed under any other regulatory authority, all right, part of that process, of the application and approval process will entail us ensuring that the other body under which you, or the other regulatory body under which you should have been licensed has indeed licensed you. In fact, the Act specifically says that where you fail to be licensed by that regulatory body, and the Secretary's advice, he can then basically revoke your license. Now, as far as foreign persons are concerned, operating, those who are doing so and doing so properly that would have been part of the process of approval with the BIA. So we would have been advised accordingly, okay? So in answer to your question, if you're talking about someone who's an accountant, an architect, anyone who's where there's another body regulating them, all right, they would have to provide us with, right, that approval from that body.
Yes, a legal comment on that also. I concur with my colleague, and also I think your acts make similar provisions in relation to that Professional Engineers Act. So, under the provisions that relate to temporary registrations, I think that goes hand in hand with what the Department of Inland Revenue was saying. So even though you're bringing in some body, the professional association that they're associated with still have to be part of the process directly, which is similar with most associations. Us with the Bar Association, if we have to go through special provisions even when we bring in Crown Counsel from abroad to do special, so it's a similar type situation. You still have to go through procedures within the association.
I have a question, inland revenue, in regards to the requirement for someone with a license to hand in their certification in order for their company to get a business license. Now, what are the criteria for the person that holds the license holder? For instance, an engineering company. Whenever I apply for my business license, I have to send in proof and evidence that I'm registered as a professional engineer. Now, is there a requirement for that person to be a principal of the company? Does it have to work for the company, or can there be some outside entity? It's not clear to me, because I mean, conceivably, let me give you a scenario, and then perhaps you can comment. There's a professional engineering company. They don't have any full-time employee who has a professional engineer's license, but has a colleague or somebody they work with who he uses his license to satisfy the requirement of the business license office, but doesn't work for the company, or maybe he's not a principal of the company. Is that possible? What are the criteria?
Well, I'm not in a position to say whether it's possible to circumvent, because that would primarily, I would think, depend on the criteria that your institute set in that regard. If we get an application from someone, from John Jones, okay, for a license, then John Jones will have to provide us with the requisite, if the prior approval is required, we will be looking for prior approval with regard to John Jones. All right, now if John Jones is part of a partnership, then that would have to be disclosed at that time. But the point I'm making is that we aren't there to, we can only ask for what the law dictates we ask for. And that is, if you're applying for a business license as an engineer, then we will ask you for the relevant regulatory approval. If you apply for a license as a chartered accountant, again, we will apply an attorney and so on. Okay? Now, whether you use that license and violate the provisions of your respective bodies is another issue, and that's where we have to rely on self-policing. You have to police yourself. There's only so much we can do.
Well, but maybe perhaps you can clarify. You know, I see the individual license holder a separate entity from the company that they work for. You grant, if you're a limited company, you grant the business license to that company, okay, in order to get approval from the business license office for that company that individual to be somehow substantially associated with that company? Or can they just, what are the, it's not clear.
I am not aware of any provision in the act, and my colleague might be able to help me out here, or from the floor. I'm not aware of any provision in the act that basically says that that dictates the relationship that has to exist between a license holder and a corporate entity. I would have expected that to be contained in the provisions, in the regulations of your association. So for example, I'm a chartered accountant. I'm a member of the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants. And we have specific criteria that's set with regard to who the license holders must be, all right, in a firm. So we would say that one of the partners must be a license holder, okay, for the firm to be offering certain types of services. But that is not dictated in the Business License Act. That is dictated basically in our internal regulations.
Thank you.
How is that enforced?
Well, basically, it's enforced by self-policing. It's basically enforced by the institute itself. For example, we've got things like peer reviews that are done now. That is now mandatory. So what is happening is that you've got one firm looking at the workings of another firm, and it might not be a firm within the Bahamas. It might be a firm from outside of the Bahamas, actually looking at the workings. So basically, it's a lot of self-policing that has to go on. And I've heard complaints from engineers. You know, I spend most of my time in Grand Bahama, and I've had complaints from engineers that, you know, we've got people coming on the island doing work, etc. And I'm sure the same thing pertains in Nassau. I'm revenue driven. That's what we're here to do. We, you know, I don't care how we look at it. We can't run the place without revenue. And I say the only way, we're relatively young in that regard. We are now developing the agencies and the type of control measures that need to be put in place to ensure that we are maximizing the revenues that we should be getting. But principally, we have to depend on those persons in the field, right, yourselves. You've got to remember that it's impacting your income. And we're hoping that you are going to say to us, look, there's this project going on there, and they've got 5 engineers. You know, did they apply? You know, what is their turnover like? Because if you've got 5 engineers, I don't expect you to be filing a business license, to see a business license return telling me that you only had $20,000 as revenue. Okay? So that's where we've got to rely on you guys to help us.
One more question I raised, and actually this is just based on a current, and since you say you're revenue driven, then I suppose I want an understanding as to this condition, this personally for us within a situation. We have an international client, and from what I understood initially, that as a VAT registrant, that we were entitled, once we raise an invoice, that we would have to charge VAT. Recently I was advised that because the company is an international company, that we are VAT exempt, that VAT should not be charged. And I was sort of taken aback, considering that we have the significant shortages in revenues in the country, that now that an international entity, which has the most resources, more than small local persons, and I have to now apply VAT to that little poor Bahamian guy coming in there, I gotta hit him with VAT, and all my consultants are charging VAT, that a large international entity, because they're registered, is actually VAT exempt. This was just kind of amazing to me, and so my question is if you could respond to why is the government of Bahamas giving up significant revenues, and if that's the case, then is the point is that if that is a local or if that's an international entity registered, and every person that they hire in the Bahamas now is not entitled to ask for VAT? Like, maybe you could respond to me. I'm just kind of. I'm amazed that if that it does exist, then I think we're giving away a significant amount of revenue.
All right. I'm glad you raised the question, and I'm happy to respond to you. There's been obviously some gross misinformation in that regard. Let me first of all start off by saying that there's no such thing as an exempt company. What you have with VAT are exempt activities, but not an exempt company. Now, so whoever told you you were exempt, this company was exempt. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as an exempt company. What we do have, though, is this. We have a situation where you may have a local company providing services, the benefit from which is derived somewhere else. Let me give you a case in point, and this is how this works. Let's assume that you're an architect. You have a client sitting in Florida who asks you to do a set of drawings for a home in Florida. You're sitting in the Bahamas. You do the drawings, and you send the drawings to him. The home is in Florida. The benefit from the drawings are going to be derived in Florida. We treat that as zero rated, as an export of service. Because if we don't, what we will be doing is making your services artificially more expensive than the person sitting in Florida or the person sitting in Kingston, Jamaica, and push you out of the market. So basically what we do is wherever it involves the export of goods or services, because the objective is not to make our exports artificially more expensive, and because we recognize that the use of the goods, services, or the benefit therefrom is going to be in a different jurisdiction, we treat it as zero rated. Let me repeat, there is no such thing as an exempt company. Any person providing services in the Bahamas where the benefit is derived in the Bahamas must be charged VAT if the services are being provided by a VAT registrant.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears, and we're going to switch to, oh, sorry, you have a question at the back?
Good day. I'd like to expand. My name is Michael, Practice Association. Can you hear me?
Sure, yeah.
I need to expand on the same question. There may not be an exemption, but can you elaborate a bit, please, on deferred VAT deferral? Because we have a situation with a lot of our contractors who we have the same problem. When we go to make a claim for VAT, they say to us behind a lot of these homes that are being built that they have a VAT deferral. We have been cut a VAT cost. But when we get to them, they can't give us an exemption number because you're right, there's no exemption. But they benefit from a VAT deferral. Can you expand on that a bit for me, please?
All right. Again, this is another situation where there's a bit of misunderstanding with regard to what it is. And you just said it. You said a VAT deferral. The operative word is deferral, not forgiveness. All it is a shifting of the crystallization of that particular charge from one point to the next. So here's what happens. VAT deferrals primarily only occur on importations. And what that basically does is this. Where a developer is involved in a huge project, and they would have sat with the BIA and whoever else, and we're talking about huge amounts and a constant flow of importations. What we basically do is to say, okay, we could defer the VAT that you would be paying on importation, because remember, the VAT that is paid on importation is what we call input VAT, and it's available for reclaim. So if you think about it, what's happening is that if I have materials coming in today that's $10,000, and I have materials tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, I'm constantly back and forth paying on this material. And then at the end of the month, you put in a claim, and we have to pay you all the money back. Because VAT is not a business tax. VAT is a consumer tax. So businesses that are registrants are allowed to claim back all of their input VAT deduction unless it's a deduction barred under Section 50 of the Act. So what we do is we defer it, and basically it's a convenience more than anything else. And if that developer cannot provide us with sufficient evidence with regard to the importation and use of that material, that deferred VAT crystallizes. So it is not a forgiveness of VAT. It is just a process that basically simplifies the way in which the entire process works.
Thank you. I want to touch on local government. One of the things that we, as an organization, had started to look at was the ability of persons on certain islands to review and approve projects. You know, in some of the islands, you have some very large-scale projects that have to go through a local administrator acting as what is known as a building control officer. So speak to us about that process, and are these persons qualified? And if not, we have a few suggestions as to, you know, what could be done to assist in that area.
Okay. Good morning again. The minister in his remarks spoke basically to second scheduled districts in the Family Island. Most of those like Exuma, North Andros, larger areas where you actually have persons perhaps with the expertise. So after persons are elected to local government council, they then have the authority to invest boards to deal with license of liquor stores, hotels, road traffic, franchise, taxis, also someone dealing with, or board dealing with, in terms of building and building trades. But he did not mention about the third scheduled districts, Acklands, Maguana, Berry Islands, Cat Key, those smaller areas where persons elected actually goes directly, those persons directly become members of those boards. Now, those persons may not have the expertise or the skills. And so me coming in with a plan, they stamp that plan, and basically I have the authorization to build. There's no inspection of whether the steels are laid right in the foundation, the plumbing, the electricity. The next time perhaps you come back to the house, they have a housewoman. And so there is a problem in those smaller islands where we do not have the capacity to deal with the structure that should be happening in, that we go through in Nassau, particularly in Grand Bahama, to build a house. And so as we were discussing before coming up here, it might be good that you recommend that perhaps retired persons or firms can serve in that capacity. And I was happy to hear that the minister actually made the same recommendation. And so I would think that your various companies can perhaps make recommendation that we're looking now at bringing local government to New Providence. But I'm sure that after that is done, we're gonna have to do something with addressing the shortfalls in local government in the Family Island. And these are some of the things that perhaps might be able to come into that new structure, or in terms of regulations of local government in the Family Island.
Also, I'd like to comment, in addition to what my colleague said, as well as the minister, bear in mind the Local Government Act, as we have it now, came into effect after the Buildings Regulations Act. I just want to read one or two sections. You might be aware of this, but in the discussion on these issues and for solutions going forward, bear these sections in mind. There's a Buildings Regulations extension to the Outer Islands Order, Section 23, that makes reference in subsection 3 to Section 3 of the Act itself, which is the section dealing with the building control officer, the issue we're dealing with. And it says, subject to the following modifications to the islands of Grand Bahama, excluding the port area, that is to say, references to the aforesaid sections to the building control officer shall be read and construed as reference to the area engineer resident of Grand Bahama. Now, I'm not sure if that still exists today, but it's still in the legislation as it relates to Grand Bahama. To every family island other than Grand Bahama, in respect of any building or group of buildings having a floor area of 1,200 square feet or more, if there is in the island a government engineering officer of or above the grade of a district works controller advising the then commissioner, which is now replaced by the consuls now, a floor area of not less than 2,500 square feet. So definitely there is a provision where, and I think this is in relation to some other islands and some other legislation also, if there's a senior government officer resident in that island, and I know this is not possible for all of the Schedule 2 islands, but in some cases, and as I said, this is relevant because we have to deal with this with another area also with business license. If there's a senior officer, the area engineer or district works controller or whatever, where the system is still in place, those persons can actually serve the purpose of advising that for that particular island. So for suggestions moving forward about how to solve these issues, those are two areas of the act you should bear in mind.
One of the big concerns we have is just first off, having the requisite inspections and follow through done on projects. And secondly, is having it done by someone that knows what they should be doing. For inspections, for example, I mean, we have a lot of examples where you have storms come through and communities are wiped out, and a big part of that is because the construction is not at the level that it should be. So obviously, this is a big area of concern. You have a question?
Yeah, I think we saw that with the last hurricane that came through Crooked Island. When all was said and done, we saw there were no steel in the columns, and which caused mass devastation. But the point is, even though we have the family island administrators serving as inspector, the fact of the matter is many of them do not qualify for that. We recognize that to be a deficiency.
And I know that it was mentioned that they have the authority to appoint persons to their various boards that can assist and may have the expertise, but do they?
That was really my question, that the act actually says that, and you said that there's funding as well in the local government area for them to employ appropriate professionals. And I'm glad you came on because you said what the trigger was. You spoke about 1,200 square feet and 2,500 square feet. And so I think that's a step in the right direction. But then are there any other regulations for the person that you will actually hire to do these inspections, third-party inspections?
Well, I think somebody earlier recommended placing funding there. As far as I know, there's no funding there for persons. Even those persons who serve on those boards do so voluntarily. And I think the minister mentioned that as well in his remarks. Prior to the retirement of our last director, we were attempting to put regulations in place so that we can have subsidies for these persons who are serving on these various boards. But as far as I know, there's no funding available for those persons.
One more question. I hate to be consuming, but this was an advocate. I recently visited my old hometown. Sorry. Yes. Like I said, I can try and make this my last question. But I recently visited my hometown of Crooked Island. Beautiful place. Best part of my didn't realize first time getting back there, family plot to take a look at some family land down there, and that's where I need to rest my head. But what I noticed from discussions with a lot of the locals is that it's the island has seen a significant amount of attrition from locals, right, where it's just become very difficult. And one of the persons who was still there trying to build a business and trying to make it, put forth a suggestion and asked me to take it to the policymakers, and one was whether there's any consideration. and I may be incorrect with whether there could be possibly in some of these islands that are trying to get themselves on their feet, consideration of VAT, sort of a VAT-free zones, right? To maybe some of the family islands. You know, we know some of the family islands are doing extremely well, probably better than New Providence, like the strong islands like Abaco. But whether there could be consideration of, throughout the family islands, a VAT-free zone in order to pose as a stimulus to maybe hopefully allow those local residences to maybe stay on the family island and to encourage new growth through the family island. Just a suggestion, but you know, I thought I'll bring it to those bodies.
The person who could answer that left the room. The same way we can have the Over the Hill initiative as a VAT-free zone, the same thing you could extend it to certain family island. I've been a family island boy. I 100% behind that. Because Crooked Island is second only to Andrews.
Next question. Okay, let's touch, because lunch is at 12:30, so get your questions together so we can get them out. One other thing that was raised was, and this last one that I have listed here, and this relates primarily to immigration. Short-term permanent residents being allowed to practice at all. It was a suggestion made by a local professional that there should be maybe there's a criteria where only once you've been a resident for a long enough period of time, you can even engage in any economic work at that level, because you have a lot of margins of convenience. How does immigration look at those issues? So margins of convenience and persons that primarily move here, maybe even as an extension of a major company somewhere else in the world, as that agent to get business here in the Bahamas.
Okay. Well, when you talk about margin of convenience and stuff like that, right? We can't just look at a margin and say it's margin of convenience, okay? So the view of the spouses, you're talking about the resident spouse, with those people coming, they may be professionals, right? Well, the view that I think the government looked at when they approved that was the person coming in and being the independent provider for their family, in order that they don't just sit around with nothing to do, give them free rein. I mean, like it's for a 5-year period where they could come and provide for their family, rather than just coming in and have to wait for a company to hire them, who may not want to hire them and pay them the rate for their salaries. I mean, the salaries that they would be demanding.
Is there
And
a...
the margin, that is.
Yeah, because I think I remember seeing something in the press about it, but is there like a time period? Because like if you just, how should I put this?
You mean the length of the time
Yeah,
they
like-
come in
like-
and then
like-
get married?
Because it's,
Fully operate.
yeah,
The
it,
persons we see this, I mean, and they
Yeah.
become the competitors. Persons come in some capacity to either provide a service on a particular project,
Mhm.
and in, you know, at the closure of that project, next thing you know, they're opening a business,
Mhm.
and they're now in competition with other local professionals in construction or any other field. And we have a couple, you know, there are examples of that.
Well, I guess you have that too, where persons who come in as professionals and then they marry Bahamians and then they don't even have to pay the fees anymore, right? I mean, it's the same thing, you have it either way. But I think the government will have to reconsider that. Immigration wouldn't be able to make any decision on that.
Yes, for immigration.
Mhm.
How do you deal with the situations throughout those far-flung family islands where, for the sake of development, you have individuals coming in, building these fantastic homes. During the construction period, they bring their construction managers, their quantity surveyors in, and they just claim to the immigration officer, "Well, my friend is down here to assist me in building this." That's a huge problem throughout the rest country, how do you deal with that?
Well, I know that may happen in areas where there are no presence of immigration, but on the islands where immigration is, I know those people would require a short-term work permit, and they have been doing that. Some people may come in and decide, well, this is my friend, but with the officers seeing them and acting, I'm sure they'll take steps toward prosecuting them. But in islands where there's no presence, we can't man it because there's no one to say anything about that. Number one, with no immigration, the person comes in cleared in Nassau, going on the Crooked Island, that's the end of immigration involvement there.
So,
Yes.
also immigration.
Mhm.
Hi. My question is, does immigration have plans to move to the electronic system? Because one of the things, where we can track guests, I mean, we can always, as professionals in the field, kind of police it, but then before we're even aware of certain things that are going on, the person's coming into the country, oh, I'm here as a tourist, and they're, obviously operating in a professional capacity. But I mean, because what that can help in tracking electronically is you can see patterns and, it kind of puts less of a, a
Sure.
responsibility, if you may,
Communication.
on the professionals in the field, even before they're involved or realize there's a, a project to be kind of policing.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that we have that in place. Right now, we're trying to get electronically the applications processed. I'm not sure anything about the tracking of persons when they come in and moving through the islands.
If I may expand,
Mhm.
for example, I've seen where you have engineers or architects who
Mhm.
come to the Bahamas every other week or once a month
Mhm.
for several years,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And the question is there a way to pick up that pattern? I mean, and they are bold. They tell you, well, here's what we do when we arrive at the airport. Here's how we dress. You see, because I know it's fairly easy for you to pick up on someone who has a bag of tools to conduct physical labor. But what can be done to kind of clamp down on, like, the
White collar.
consultant level? Because to me, and if you see that happening, that's a large company engaging those persons. So is there a way to ask these companies that, look, if persons, you have them coming in for meetings regularly, what would be the requirement? Would they require a short-term work permit or at all in that scenario? Because I know of that happening on several projects. You have people coming in regularly for meetings over years.
Well, I don't know. Recently, the minister have introduced the Trusted Traveler Program that allows people to come in for meetings up to 14 days. So maybe you would want to bring that up with him when he comes for the 2:30?
So can you?
I mean,
no,
and
that's
explaining
fine.
a
So
consultant,
can you talk
because
about,
it,
expand on that
it,
Trusted Traveler Program? Can you tell us a bit more about it?
maybe my coworker, Miss Bristol, she's at the airport, so she would have more dealings with them. Miss Bristol. I don't mean to put her on the spot, it's just that she may be more familiar with that. A trusted traveler.
Okay, I'm going to read you what we were given concerning the Trusted Traveler Program. This is the new Trusted Travelers Program.
And you could also mention, like, primarily who was it geared toward? Yeah.
Okay, it allows persons to visit the Bahamas for a period under 14 days without requiring a work permission, provided they are not engaging in gainful occupation.
Okay. Yeah. So the question really is, and the point of this is, we know that there are these gaps. We're trying to figure out what's the best way to fill these gaps.
So this is the opportunity you would have, because when the minister comes, then that is a question we need to bring up and let him know your
Now, in anticipation of that, because you guys are on the ground, we see from the professional standpoint, you guys are from the enforcement angle. What do you think is a way that we can fill these gaps so that we can push for these things with the minister from the private sector? Because I know working in the ministry, you may not have the same opportunity that we would have to push. So what would be your suggestion as to how we can fill those gaps to capture these persons that shouldn't be here?
What the gentleman here, in 9 minutes?
Mhm.
Okay, he made a suggestion that, can put back on. Can you hear me? Okay, like you have an academic association, you have the medical association, you have bar association, all, you have the, musician union. All of these are organizations that, try to control
Enforce.
the, foreigners competing with the Bahamians. And so, if you pressure the government to ensure that your organization is consulted with what this
Recognize.
person has given to this, that is an opportunity that we can use.
Right.
I don't know why they need to come for 2 weeks.
Could I ask a question so I can understand a bit better also? Who are bringing these people in? Members of your association or?
No,
Not always, I don't think.
this,
Uh-huh.
yeah, this is, yeah, yeah. Yeah. What I can,
So, okay, two points for you. Okay, if the members of your association bring them in, you have to police your association. If that's not the case, then how are they being allowed? Once you have noticed that somebody who is coming in here is not properly licensed by your act to do what they're claiming to do, although they claim they're coming as tourists, they're not doing, but you know they're doing it, they're practicing illegally.
Yep.
And if you're aware of that situation, whoever those persons may be, then that needs to be, where your association has the authority to take necessary action, because they should not be practicing in the country to start with. The government can, yes,
We capture that, right?
yes.
In some instances, that may be a remote house somewhere, that could be a remote house on a family island, or right? A lot of these persons are developing significant PE, right? And we're not necessarily visibly there, but the only thing is, you see the
You see
end
it's
result.
happening.
Or
Okay.
you may, or when it's posted on the real estate, that this was developed. Where we get a lot of notification is when these architects or companies are actually advertising their services and indicated that they've done these projects throughout
Oh,
the families to the Bahamas, and that's when we're made aware that, wow, this company is now indicating that it's developed all of these major developments. And there's no indication of any local participation as a joint venture. And that's when we become apprised that these things are happening. And some local persons are advertising the services and then blatantly bringing in these persons to participate in that venture. And we're seeing the loss of revenue to the country.
Well, and that was going to be the point that I was going to, I alluded to earlier, and I was going to reiterate. I think that there are too many instances where we stop and say, what will the government do? The government can only basically police so much. You have to do the self-policing. Reference is made to these monstrosities that are being built. They didn't just come out of the ground overnight. Somebody must have seen the progress, all right? You as an association have to say somebody is violating. And in lots of instances, this is being done in collaboration with some of your own members. So I'm saying that if that's the case, you have to police it. If we don't police the accounting profession, we would be suffering from the same problem. But we police it, and we try to police it as vigorously as we could. All right. There are companies that are going to bring persons in. We understand that. Okay? Once they come in and they come in legitimately, and it's being done properly, and they're complying with the rules, the regulations of our institute, we're fine. I'm imploring you, police it, let us know. You refer to persons, doing these projects we need to know about. There's revenue that we're losing. So we need to know about it. You need to tap into all of the agencies, immigration, DIR, all of the agencies, so that we can be, we can then tap into it and know what's going on. Bahamas Customs, a lot of these keys, if they're putting up huge houses, how is the material getting here? That's how we're losing revenue. How is the material getting here? Is the material being brought in on barges, private boats? But we are in a position, if we're advised, we can assess. We can actually turn up there and say, could we see the customs documentation for the materials used? We will then probably rely on you to say, could you give us, in your best estimate, because the VAT controller, if he's going to assess, can ask any expert opinion. Could you give us, based on what you see, what the material content of this building is? And based on that, I can say to the owner, all right, or meaning the Department of Inland Revenue can then say, we are going to assess you for the VAT that should have been paid on importation. And trust me, our assessment always errs.
Okay, well, I'm gonna throw this in there right quick. The Engineering Contractors and Architects Association are more than happy to partner with all of the agencies in reporting and sharing information in order that we can get a handle on this. What we need from each of your agencies is to ensure that your reporting system is very clear and that someone is there to answer the phone or receive the emails.
I'm going to tell you, I told you Miss Roll is here. She will give you her number and her. You notice I didn't say I would. She was giving. No, but I'm serious. We're serious about this. We're very serious about it. What you have to understand is that there are provisions in our Act, especially the VAT Act, that we can use to assist with certain types of enforcement.
We're aware of it, but
Okay.
like I was speaking with Madam Immigration here, there have been times where persons have called into a government agency to report something, and the phone rings forever. So it's just really the small things. People are willing. This is not a new thing. People have been willing and have been trying to report a lot of these incidents with no follow-up. So we just want to raise that so that you guys make sure that your departments.
Well, I can assure you that any opportunity for increased revenue is immediately embraced.
Okay, hold on.
Because email hotlines are good ways where persons can respond quickly, and maybe have someone that responds to emails rather than telephones. Yeah. Because that person could automatically, I don't know if that could be considered across the board.
That's a good idea.
Okay, so,
Let's get Sonia, and then we're going to get Winston Jones involved.
oh, okay. So again, a story, when I was employed at Atlantis, the Professional Engineers Board sent Atlantis a letter. Please tell us who, the engineers you have employed are registered. And I implore the Professional Engineers Board, Professional Architects Board, to simply send a letter to these large companies once a year, post it in the newspaper, and that's all you have to do. You see, Atlantis had me, Melanie, and Kevin McDonald there all at the same time, so they were able to say, we have 3 licensed engineers employed, and everybody who's working there is working under them. But that's all you have to do. Ask the question. Please, as a part, just report who you have working either full-time or on a consultancy basis. And I can guarantee you that, just point to the relevant legislation that you would be breaching if you're not reporting and applying for the appropriate permits. And so, huh? Well, and then, so if someone doesn't respond, then what do you do? Okay? So it comes back to us regulating our own industry. Because if someone doesn't respond to you, if someone doesn't pay your bill, I'm sure you send in your, your invoice and they don't respond, what you do, you keep calling them until they pay it, right? You turn the light off. Okay.
Thank you. I'm sure that a lot of you are aware of a situation, it's a bit of a celebrated situation, which occurred recently in this country, where an individual who held himself out to be an architect from the States got involved with 11 major projects in this country. I know that it's true because one of them, I have direct, I know someone directly involved in it, and it's causing him a lot of grief. The business license is one of the best keys to controlling what goes on in this country. I actually had a situation where the Ministry of Works, and rightly so, would not accept an application for a permit because my business license was not in my hand. It was in process, but I didn't have it. I did get the receipt, and Mr. Delancey was kind enough to pass the information down to allow us to submit. But if you tie, the business license is so important in this country now, it's keyed into other things. Even if you have to bring a business license, show it every time you put in an application. Don't leave one on file, bring it in, even stamp drawings. The business license is a great way to control things, and of course you can't get it without your NIB up to date. And that's how you have to control at least the permitting side of things. Once that is taken care of, then managing what goes on in the construction side of things is another kettle of fish. But I think really the business license is the way to try and control things for the betterment of those of us who practice in this country. Thank you.
And we also have. You still want to give a comment?
Oh, concerning the immigration hotline?
Yes.
Okay, the number that was accessible on the switchboard, that is not working. However, if you dial 341-9191, that is the one that you should be able to reach. And the person who gave the suggestion of the email hotline, I think that's a good idea. You can put that forward.
Yeah. So that number again is 3419191. You say it's down now?
No.
Oh, that's the working one, okay. All right, so for everyone that needs to report immigration issues, 3419191.
I have a question for Inland Revenue again. You mentioned partnering with revenue collection agencies and what have you. It seems to me that the Inland Revenue have a plethora of good information that we as an industry can use for information. When we were putting this forum together, we were struggling to find information on the value of construction in Bahamas, and we were referring to, I think Sonia was referring to a report that was done by the Department of Statistics, I think, where they talked about construction starts based on information that was provided with permits, construction completions, and what have you. And it was a good indicator, but it seems to me that the Department of Inland Revenue has the information we need. Most of the construction has been done by VAT-registered contractors. I would say the majority of them are the construction. You have smaller contractors who do work, but I would say that based on the revenue that is generated, because they have to put their they have to file VAT every month, every quarter. It seems to me that those figures can be very informative to us to make some determinations. Like for instance, we as an example, we use 5 to 10% of the value of construction to determine what fees should be. If we can get information such as the value of construction, what the actual values are versus some estimate from the value that was reported when a building permit was submitted to the Ministry of Works, which is sometimes very different from what it actually is at the end of the day. We can, if that kind of information is available without revealing confidential information of individual vendors, is that type of information available?
Yes and no. When I say yes and no, what I mean is basically this, that there's some information that we can freely share with other agencies, all right? And naturally, you must understand that we are limited with regard to the amount of information, especially if it's private information or information that could be tracked, that we can share. However, do bear in mind that there's the Freedom of Information Act that's coming about, all right? And the Freedom of Information Act is going to basically entitle you, right, to seek certain types of information from us, and this is why that act is being put in place, all right? So the act gives you, or any person, all right, the opportunity to get information, but it also protects us with regard to the dissemination of information, all right? So I'm saying that to say to you that normally that type of information you would probably garner through the Department of Statistics, all right? However, with the coming into being of the Freedom of Information Act, you might be able to get that information a whole lot more direct, and we might be placed in a position where we can assist you, all right, a whole lot more then, all right, in that regard. So, you know, let's wait for the Freedom of Information Act, all right, and I'm sure that we'll be able to assist comfortably, both from our perspective as well as yours.
Do we have any other questions? We got a question at the back? Where's the mic?
Good afternoon, all. This is addressed to Mr. Keith Worrell. Private home owners / investors on the Family Islands. I think we have a real serious problem with them coming in, constructing homes, and a lot of these homes are not, shall I say, I don't want to say accounted for, but revenue is being lost because a lot of them come in and they rent these homes. And then another thing is that a lot of these homes go up, and some of them are over, say, 25,000, 3,000 square feet, and there is no inspection of these homes. And when I say that, engineers at least a certain level, but they're 2-story and up, an engineer's stamp is needed, okay? And so what we are getting at Ministry of Works is that these homes are going up, and sometimes after, when they submit for occupancy, the engineer sometimes do not inspect these jobs. So most of the onus is placed on Ministry of Works to do the job, when I think the engineers / architects, once you put your stamp on them, you are responsible at some point to go and do the inspection on these homes, and not just submitting a letter saying that, you know, blah, 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 but you've never really been on the job. I mean, that is some of my,
Sonia, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I'll touch that. I think you missed when I talked about how I'm having a fight right now with a client who wants me to write a letter without inspecting because they don't want to pay for the inspections. And so we need to make it clear that we need to make it a matter of policy that if somebody signs the drawings, then they have to do a certain amount of inspections. And so if that is a policy of the Building Control Department, then we won't be facing these problems in industry, okay? Because we're willing to do the inspections. So, I mean, the Building Control Department should have the authority to say the letter is not acceptable and it must have some field reports attached with photos stating dates of inspections or whatever. And so we can talk about that more offline, because your minister gave us permission to discuss those types of initiatives with the Building Control Officer in our meeting Friday. I think one last, because this is a WTO question.
Hello, good afternoon. I have a question, if anyone of the panelists maybe could help. What protections are there as we're trying, are there for the construction and the engineering field as a whole Because I mean, from what I understand, it's supposed to open up, I guess, borders to make a fair playing field for everyone. But as it stands, I guess we're behind as it's concerned to foreign contractors and engineers. So what protections are there for us right now?
Sorry. Yes, I was saying that that's not a question I would attempt to deal with at this forum, in as much as I might have some ideas. I think Shivago Lang, all right, the former minister, all right, has done quite a bit on it. Oh, okay. Okay, I thought somebody was indicating it was me.
I was trying to avoid that question.
I have my own views on that.
I don't have a view, I have a public view. I am actually a part of the process along with the Attorney General's office, but has the industry, let me ask the industry, has the industry had any communications with financial services on that issue? Because I know financial services is in the process of preparing the countries, what do they call it, for the sake of this, I call it position, I forgot the official name we call it, but on every aspect of the accession process. As it relates to industry matters, the financial services would have had various sector talks with the various sectors as to get their input as to what they feel is necessary, what they think they can put in our, I cannot remember the word, accession process, let's call it that way. So has the industry had any discussions with financial services? That's the first thing I would ask.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so you are probably in a better position from your perspective to tell you exactly what financial services would have advised you. It's still at the very middle stages of negotiations, so we haven't made any final commitments yet as to what our offer, so what I'm looking for, what our official offer is. The process is continuing in Geneva next month, I think, with bilateral negotiations about to begin. So if there are any issues that the industry has, I would suggest Acting Director Keva Bain at Ministry of Financial Services and her team. They will be in a better position to tell you exactly what the industry position is in terms of, but I want, again, as you said, Mr. Lang, who's the chief negotiator, but I think we need to get out of this idea in the Bahamas that WTO is going to just open up the floodgates for everybody to come in. That's not the correct position of what's going to happen with the WTO process. But again, I would defer that to the proper ministry, which is Financial Services, who will, through Mr. Lang as well as the director, who can give you better advice on that. But
Okay, I'll take one last question if there is one. Otherwise, I want to call Mr. Conrad Williamson to come and bless the lunch. And obviously, I want to thank the panel for your time and effort and your knowledge. It was very informative. There's a lot of stuff we have to work on, but I want to implore all of the professionals as well as the persons representing the various departments. We need to work together to fill in the gaps.